Politics can be messy, and there's always a lot of finger-pointing over outside cash influencing local elections. Today, we hear from one of those out-of-state contributors, the owner of a fondue restaurant, who has no problem dipping into the affairs of Idaho. Speaking of cheese, a $1 billion surplus plus a $2 billion pledge to Idaho schools. With all these B's being thrown around, why are some school districts still asking for a whole lot of C notes? We answer another viewer question. You know, there are only a handful of ways to get out of southern Idaho. You can walk, drive, or fly. But what about ride, as in on a rail? One Idahoan could have a very strong voice in whether passenger trains return to the Treasure Valley. Well, there hasn't been a passenger train pass through southern Idaho in more than a quarter century. But now someone with a stake in Treasure Valley transportation is just one Senate vote away from having a say about the possible return. Valley Regional Transit CEO Clegg has been nominated for the Amtrak Board of Directors. This is a pretty big deal as Amtrak weighs expansion. It's an even bigger deal considering Clegg has been an advocate for rail service since the last Amtrak train left Boise. And as Joe Paris found out, the national company has never had someone from the wide open West be part of such big decisions.
The word from the White House. They want an Idahoan as a member of the Amtrak Board of Directors.
It's quite an honor. It's been a long time, I think, since an Idahoan has been nominated at all, but no one's ever served on the Amtrak board from this part of the country.
Clegg is the CEO of Valley Regional Transit and has worked on transportation issues as a focus of her public service career for more than 25 years. If approved by the United States Senate, Clegg will join an Amtrak board looking to make major moves, something she has done for decades.
I helped organize the first meeting of the group that's now the Northwest Passenger Rail Working Group, which is Montana, Idaho, Oregon, Washington, Utah, Wyoming, and more. And that group's now held a couple of rail summits, and the whole focus of that has been, can we expand rail back into the West? There's also an FRA long distance study that has a route that does serve Boise on it, and that route's going to be forwarded to Congress soon.
Clegg still needs to be confirmed congressionally, something that could help focus the national conversation to the West Coast.
If that happens, look forward actually to representing that Western point of view. And there's been a lot of talk recently about expanding rail back into the West. It's hard not to think that this signals at least a willingness to talk about that.
A former member of Boise City Council, Clegg was part of still ongoing efforts to reestablish passenger rail in Idaho and the entire greater Northwest. On a personal and professional level, this nomination validates decades of dedication.
I would never have dreamed of this in all my service, to get a presidential nomination, a congressional confirmation. From a professional level, it's so exciting because especially rail right now in this country, there's so many opportunities, and being able to be part of that conversation would be great.
So what is it about transportation that captures Clegg's dedication and passion? So much so that President Biden's administration says we need her help in the national conversation.
Well, you know, everybody has to get around, and we've built a system in this country that makes it harder for some people than others to do that. And because of that, it means that there are some people who have easier access and more opportunity than other people. And I'm the kind of person who believes that this country was built on equal opportunity. And so for me, transportation is building equal opportunity back into our life.
And we'll keep you posted on the nomination and possible confirmation there. But on the topic of Amtrak to Boise, we do continue to follow that. There are proposed expansions that, as you heard, do include a Boise route. Later this year, the Greater Northwest Rail Summit will be in Spokane, Washington on October 8th and 9th. And the Federal Railroad Administration's long-distance survey is also going on. It's recommending 15 routes to expand the nation's passenger rail system. Brian, it's something that gets talked about a lot out here, and I know in recent years. We've covered stories here on the 208. The truth of the matter is, though, it takes time to put this together.
It takes time, and ITD misplaced or just forgot to apply for that grant, that survey you were talking for. They will have another opportunity to do that. They expect to do that in 2025. I think that's what they told us a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
My question is, when will she know if she's going to be on the board?
So the thing with this, the presidential nomination and then the congressional approval, she's kind of kept in the dark. She knew from several months ago, that her name had been put out there as a possible nomination. When she heard back, though, I asked, like, do you get a call? Do you get an email from the White House? And that's what you do. You get an email, and I joked with her that if you get that in, you would maybe imagine it was spam. Yeah,
of course.
But she was expecting it. She knew that it was possible it would happen. For now, though, it's wait and see for her. These presidential nominations and confirmations, sometimes they go through real quickly. Sometimes, for whatever reason, they get held up. There are other names that are out there right now as well, so we'll keep an eye on it.
If we know anything about Senate nominations and election years, well, we'll see what happens.
No kidding.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Well, viewer questions keep the 208 going, as you know. It's also one of our favorite things. You know, raindrops on roses, whiskers on kittens. Viewers that come to the table with questions, or cream-colored ponies, Chris apple sprudels. Viewers with questions to strengthen our noodles, that kind of thing. Anyway, Chris from Meridian posited this query last week. Can someone explain where our $1 billion surplus went and why school districts are asking for levies, going to 4 days a week, or closing schools altogether to stay afloat? It's a multi-part question. Brown paper packages tied up with strings. Let's work backwards. School closings have to do with shrinking student body. As for the 4-day school weeks, well, about 40% of Idaho school districts have moved to 4 instead of 5 schedule. And that shift, according to the Idaho School Boards Association, has to do with the ability to attract and retain teachers. But all of them at the core are also about saving money. Okay, so what about that $1 billion surplus Chris asked about? Well, we did have that surplus, or close to that, for several years in a row, thanks in large part to an influx of federal COVID cash. Fiscal year 2021 ended with $890 million surplus. In 2022, Idaho had a $1.4 billion surplus, and by the end of June of 2023, we had a $99.1 million surplus. Thanks to the revenues coming in $80 million more than expected, and state agencies spending $19 million less. So what happened to it? Well, in 2022, the $1.4 billion in the bank, the legislature passed an income and corporate tax cut to the tune of $600 million. Then later that summer, in a special session, lawmakers passed $1 billion more in tax cuts and increased school funding. Remember those $300 and $600 rebate checks we got in 2022? That was part of that. Well, that bill also dropped our income tax rate from 6% to a flat rate of 5.8%, and it also helped start Idaho Launch, $80 million toward the governor's grant program that helps pay for trade school education. So then last year, with that $99.1 million surplus, that went to property tax relief. Basically, Idaho is going to give money to the schools so property owners would pay less in taxes that pay for those schools. $50 million directly to property tax relief. The rest of it was going to be split between school districts and counties to pay for existing levies that are on the books. So there it went, all spent. But if they all got this money, why are some schools still running a levy this month in the May election? To get that answer, we asked the Kuna School District why they are hoping taxpayers agree to a $5.3 million levy. And they told us the money they got from the state last year, just $2.1 million. And that went to pay off some of the $40 million levy they passed in 2017. So it wasn't a lot of money, and it went toward debt they already had. So they still need more. Why? Well, we were told 2 reasons. One, half the levy will pay for staff because school funding now has been returned to attendance-based rather than enrollment, meaning if you have 100 kids in school and on average 5 kids a day miss for sickness or whatever, well, schools are going to miss out on that 5% of what they would get if it was based on kids and rolls, not just those who didn't show up. And the second reason.
The second part of that levy is for what we're calling as emergency, basically emergency jobs. I have 2 roofs that are past their lifespan. We can patch them, but they both need to be replaced. I have 4 schools that need updated fire panels. I need 3 school buses, and then I have 3 schools that need major HVAC remedies or renovations or updates.
And so that emergency, some of those emergency jobs, they fall under the facilities category, which can cover that, but some don't. Remember, Kuna tried to pass a bond last year for maintenance and repair projects, and it failed. And had that passed, Brian Graves told us they wouldn't be having one this go-round. Also, with the governor's pledge of $2 billion over the next 10 years for school facilities, Kuna's cut would be about $20 million over the next decade. And that isn't quite enough to pay for a new elementary school, about $2 million a year. And these days, an elementary school is going for about $28 million. It's not even enough to pay for all the district's maintenance needs, they tell us. Some, but that's okay. And so they're not going to look a gift horse in the mouth when they give you this $2 million. But that brings us to why CUNA is asking for a voter-approved levy.
I probably have $100 million of projects, building updates that I need to do in CUNA School District on our 11 school sites and buildings.
Bottom line is school districts run bonds and levies because they don't get enough money from the state to function on a daily, yearly basis.
I would agree with that 100%.
Like how much of a shortfall are we talking about?
I would say that our levy, what we're asking for is probably 10 to 15% of our budget, maybe closer to 20%.
So you're saying the state gives you about 80% of the budget you need?
Correct. To do what CUNA says that CUNA needs for CUNA's parents and children, yes.
They all get together at these meetings and say, we want to do this program, we want to do this program, and they go, cool, now we got to pay for it.
Correct. Yeah, we want school nurses, we want school resource officers, we want gifted and talented above and beyond what you can do in the classroom.
And the state won't pay for that?
The state tells us that we can decide how to do that, but we say that's not in the budget that they give us, no.
Remember, bonds are for buildings, levies are for learning, as they tell us, and maintenance, apparently. So if the parents want these programs, the gate or any of the other things, even a school resource officer in the school, well, then CUNA needs to help pay for them with a levy. And that election coming up in just 2 weeks. Speaking of that, the sign saga continues. For the last couple of weeks, we've been updating you on the Commissioner Ryan Davidson / Clyde Dornier finger-pointing over campaign signs. Dornier wants to replace Davidson as Ada County Commissioner, and notice Davidson's campaign had put up signs from the last election, which is a good way to save money, but not when the endorsement listed at the bottom of that sign isn't accurate. Conservative Citizens for Thoughtful Growth did pay for those Davidson signs back in 2020, but this time around, they've thrown their support behind Dornier, according to his campaign, and they've complained about that fact, not once, not twice, but 3 times at the Ada County Clerk's office, with the suggestion if this is not resolved, the issue be sent up the ladder to the Secretary of State's office. Since Dornier claims it would be a violation of state campaign rules to, quote, promote openness in government and to promote transparency by those giving financial support to election campaigns, end quote. We did reach out to Davidson several times about this, but other than his plea on social media last week for his supporters to take down those old signs, he hasn't responded. But apparently they didn't finish the job. A third complaint was filed Friday, and it is now in the hands of the Secretary of State. And they told us this afternoon they are in the process of reviewing it, and at this point, they haven't identified any violations under the statute. So we'll see if that changes. The Idaho primary elections are 15 days away, and in a super majority red state, the Republican primary decides a lot of who you might see running things come January 1st. You've likely seen the signs out there, the election ads, and even messages to your personal phone, including this banger naming Senate Pro Tem Chuck Winder the Swamp King. It contains a lot of the usual rhino accusations in there, so clearly the crown is heavy. And other people want it at this point, or at least they want to knock it off, which is now a good time to bring in Andrew Bartline, who has, well, a paper trail that leads back to the Freedom Caucus with this, right?
Members belonging to the Freedom Caucus, and it's funny because it's also crossing state borders here. So the bottom of that text message, it attributes the electioneering back to Make Liberty Win. And it's through those public documents with the Secretary of State's office that we know that they're connected to Young Americans for Liberty. That's a lobby out of Texas. They're using the same address. And they're the biggest spender in Idaho politics in recent years. But also, Make Liberty Win receives funding from a fondue business that's out of South Carolina. And here's where it gets real fun, because that fondue company is owned by a South Carolina state representative, a man who does not know who Chuck Winder is and doesn't have any connection to the Gem State. For a body that operates under a skylight, there's nothing new under the sun.
They have a problem.
Accusations are thrown regularly,
Plaster our neighbors with lies.
even elevated in election years.
I can honestly say all my colleagues have never seen anything like the last two election cycles.
Senate Pro Tem Chuck Winder
Right.
is the latest lawmaker on a long list.
It's kind of what I'd call the true Idaho conservatives. You know, it's unbelievable.
The group is called Make Liberty Win. On paper, it's a new player in Idaho politics, but under the state sunshine laws, they're just a new name for Young Americans for Liberty.
It could be as much as $500,000 in Idaho elections. There's not a dime coming out of Idaho for that.
How does that compare to other group spending in the past?
Oh, they're one of the largest ever.
that are
And
moving
playing
around
a
our
far
state.
too familiar game.
Yeah, they're here illegally. They're a huge part of our economy because we're for amnesty, because we're for amnesty, because we're for amnesty.
This misleading voicemail was sent to voters the same day Make Liberty Win sent this text message. Do you think it is that group?
I assume it is, but don't know.
Don't have driver's license.
The automated voicemails from a 2023 floor debate. And yes, Winder did say all of those words, but in context, he meant the opposite.
I challenge you to prove that about any one of us. You can say it.
And Winder,
It's real easy to say.
he called out the lie,
Publish it on your Facebook.
how it would happen,
You can write from special interest groups and attack us.
and even what group would do it.
That's not what this body's about.
President, object. Point of order. He's disparaging members of the body.
Your objection is overruled. Senator Winter, you can continue.
And I won't take that as a personal confession.
But maybe this is.
Well, I had even forgotten I gave to them.
And what is your personal interest then in Idaho politics?
I'm actually in the Freedom Caucus of South Carolina. I'm a state legislator. I have zero interest in Idaho politics. I don't think when you donate, you can say, I want it to go to this candidate or this state.
We trace dollars back to the South Carolina representative through Columbia Fondue, a company listed on Make Liberty Win documents.
That's one of my businesses.
The same group slamming Winder and others. So that's kind of what the money you've contributed is going toward here in Idaho.
Well, if he's fighting the Freedom Caucus, I believe it's happening. I call them the country club Republicans. Both sides are using the same tactics.
Never have met him to my knowledge.
Never talked to him.
Not to my knowledge.
And it goes further with mailers.
They're putting door hangers up, basically lying about members of the Idaho Senate and what we stand for and what we voted for.
Sound familiar?
Because we're for amnesty, because we're for amnesty.
It's unconfirmed who's truly behind the voicemail.
I don't know that at least the copy I got, whether it identified their group or not.
But it shows electioneering in the shadows works if the voters are there with you.
So they're counting on trying to deceive voters, particularly the new voters that are here, that have come here for conservative reasons.
And not to say that Winder and this lawmaker from South Carolina are entirely at odds with each other. I'm sure they'd get along if they did meet, but they did have very similar things to say about how they're treated during election cycles, which I think every candidate thinks about this.
Yeah.
For example, you vote no on a budget because you think a certain line item's bloated.
Right.
But that budget also funds police. Well, ads are going to come out and say you don't support the blue. When that's not the reason you voted against it, both of them say that happens to them and they don't like it.
Or you don't want to vote for a bill because it'll punish a librarian for what book is where in the library for $10,000, and all of a sudden you're for porn in the libraries.
There's a lot of different ways it happens, but yes, it'll be twisted in some way or another.
Okay. So this is what's interesting to me is that this money coming in, they spend it wherever, and everybody's pointing to each other saying, we're not going to use this. This isn't an AI thing, by the way. I just want to point that out, too. This was a simple edit, right?
Yeah. just cut some audio, smash it together. He said all those words, just not in that order.
Just not in that order. All right, thanks, Andrew. Going too fast. That's the reason a YMCA camp bus full of kids crashed coming back from Valley County last summer. And the driver just got a citation for speeding. Esten Schumpert updates on that story and several others in today's 411.
Never before heard recordings were played for jurors today during the 5th week of Chad Daybell's murder trial. Chad is accused of murdering his wife Lori Vallow Daybell's kids, JJ and Tylee, as well as his first wife Tammy. Lori's niece, Milani, and her husband, Ian Pawlowski, testified today that Chad and Lori taught them about light and dark, evil spirits, castings, and zombies, but Chad was the orchestrator behind those ideas.
What about light and dark? Do the scriptures reference light and dark in the same way Chad and Lori were teaching about it?
No, they would use it as a basis and then elaborate with their ideas.
Milani said she was taught darkness overtook some people and couldn't be cast out, so the person would pass away. Prosecutors pointed out the couple designated JJ, Tylee, Tammy, and Lori's fourth husband, Charles Vallow, as dark. All of those people are now dead. Court picks back up tomorrow. The driver of the YMCA camp bus that crashed and injured several kids was cited for speeding. The Boise County Prosecutor's Office says the 64-year-old woman was driving too fast for road conditions on Highway 55. The bus was carrying 28 youth campers and staff back to Boise from the Treasure Valley YMCA's camp in August of 2023. Investigators say the driver overcorrected, causing it to roll over. The crash hurt 8 people, including the driver. Absentee ballots aren't the only way to vote early for the May 21st primary. Early in-person voting in Ada County and Canyon County starts today and runs through the 27th. Polls are open for both counties weekdays from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. In Ada County, voters can go to the Ada County Elections Office, Meridian City Hall, Boise City Hall, and the Eagle Public Library. Cast your ballot early in Canyon County at the Hispanic Cultural Center and Caldwell Elks Lodge. You can also register to vote at any of those locations. Just remember your photo ID and proof of residence. And that's the 411 on the 208. I'm Aspen Shumpert.
All right, try to speak as quickly as I could. We still only have a minute left here in the show, so let's get to your comments. This one from Rick. Out-of-state PACs and the legislature is worried about paid signature gatherers for getting bills proposed. Right. This one from Mike. Is it Mick Mike? Mick Mike or Mike Mick? We'll go with this one. Funds based on attendance seems wrong since staffing needs to be done off enrollment. Am I missing something? No, that's kind of how it works. That's the way it is right now. How is it the school district doesn't know what their needs are prior to committing to any budget? That's what Larry has, a question he has. Problem is, so many people keep moving into places like CUNA. Their budget was set ahead of time, but they have to keep filling these schools and overfilling them sometimes before they can get into new schools and fund those as well. So that's kind of where they are with that, is like they don't know ahead of time how many people are going to move in, but they do the best they can. And all of a sudden, 2 years down the road, you got to build a new school. Wait, doesn't Elaine Clegg also have a tree planting program named after her, says Becca in Boise? Yes, the Elaine Clegg City of Trees Challenge. They wanted to raise or plant 100,000 trees. I think they've done it, but it's still happening.